caused the rapid fracture of the lower limb of the eye. It was very clear once the lower limb failed, the whole eye bar would fail.
In 1926, the designers had been sure the new high-strength steel could carry the stresses of a suspension bridge. The Silver Bridge hung from single eye bar chains on both sides of the road. But the tiny, undetected crack caused a single link to fail. When the chain on one side of the bridge snapped, the other chain could not take the weight of the bridge, and down it went. In the aftermath of the Silver Bridge disaster, the United States government instituted a national inspection program, taking particular care to look at bridges built of high-strength steel in the 1920s. The daring Silver Bridge had lasted for 41 years before its weakness was revealed. But in the 1960s, engineers developed a revolutionary light steel bridge. Its weakness was revealed with frightening speed. The story when collapse continues.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, rated PG-13, starts Friday.
A modern road bridge needs to be light, strong, and economical. This is one of the most popular designs of the last 20 years. A steel box girder bridge. The steel box girder was a revolution in bridge design. It promised a fast new method of putting up medium-length spans. The designers, the London firm of Freeman Fox and Partners, claimed they could cut costs by 25%. By the end of the 60s, they had designed boxed girder bridges at Avonmouth and Milford Haven in Wales, as well as in Germany and here in Australia. The city of Melbourne had expanded into industrial suburbs that spanned the two sides of the Yarra River. It was the perfect cause for a new road bridge. Construction started in 1968. And little by little, the Melbourne Bridge came to life. The great steel boxes were assembled in long half sections on the ground. Then they were jacked up to the tops of the concrete piers and bolted together. It was a sophisticated job. The bolt holes had to line up exactly. If not, the connecting plates or diaphragms would snag. One of the steel workers on the bridge was Eddie Halsell.
Monday morning when we went in, it had been a very hot Sunday, and one of these diaphragms had caught up with the decking on the north side, and that's what started the bulge off.
A bulge or buckle in the steel had created a gap several feet wide between the two halves of the box. The engineers made several attempts to pull the two sides back in line.
And it got worse as time went on, you know. People were trying to straighten it out and it wouldn't come straight.
It was decided to snap off the bolts that held the two sides of the box together, in hope that this would relieve the pressures causing the buckle, and work could then proceed. Freeman Fox's engineer on the troubled span was a young graduate.
And this young man, I think he was 23 at the time, had really very little experience of building bridges at all. He went over to his own side of the bridge where he met his colleague, corresponding number on the contractor's side, a fellow called Tracy, and said, look, we're going to take these bolts out and flatten this bulge. And Tracy said to him, in effect, over my dead body, you're not going to do that, it's not safe.
But Freeman Fox was calling the shots. On October 15th, the workers started removing the bolts.
And Barney Butties was there taking the bolts out, and I said, don't be so bloody stupid, Barney, put them back in, you know. And he just said, oh, piss off or something.
When 36 bolts came out, the bulge suddenly grew by 30 feet. The steel turned blue. The rust was flaking off it. The whole structure was under terrific stress.
All these engineers came around, and I said, well, I'm going down the road now.
At 11:30, Freeman Fox's man was joined by 3 more experienced colleagues. One of them phoned a senior engineer in Melbourne.
He said, look, we've got problems. Would you come over? And then, as if speaking to himself, I wonder if I ought to get the bonds off. In other words, you know, this doesn't look healthy. Ought I to get the workmen off the bridge?
But he didn't. Instead, workers desperately tried to replace the bolts they'd just removed. Eddie and his friend Pat Hannafy broke for lunch.
And when we come down the lift and we come out, I could hear noise. It was like someone shooting.
The remaining bolts could no longer carry the weight of the steel box girders. They shot out of their holes.
Like machine gun fire. I decided I looked up and it had left the pier.
And then we panicked.
The great steel span fell 120 feet to the ground.
There's this big fire in the bridge. So I went round and saw a couple of blokes, and oh, it was shocking. The big crane had slid right down the bridge, and all the welding machines and the generators were on fire, and there was oxy bottles flying through the air like rockets. It's no good that day.
What had caused the girder bridge to fail? Was it the lightweight metal? The design? Investigators urgently search for the answer when collapse continues. When the box girder bridge collapsed in Melbourne, Australia, 35 men died, including 3 of the 4 Freeman Fox engineers. The young engineer who'd ordered the bolts removed survived. The Australian government set up a commission of inquiry into the collapse of the bridge.
When I arrived on the following day, the bridge was lying there. It had knocked over one of the piers, and there was this enormous fold in the middle of the bridge, which was the area where it had collapsed.
Well, there was so much on the wreck that it was very difficult to form any distinct impression to say, well, that is the cause of the accident.
Their investigation was being watched all over the world. For Melbourne wasn't the only box girder bridge to collapse. 4 months earlier, the Milford Haven Bridge in South Wales had also come down. In fact, 3 box girder bridges failed during construction that year. No one knew why. Least of all, the designers, Freeman Fox.
After those collapses had happened, there was grave concern about the viability of this form of box girder as a means of creating a bridge. And I remember when I first joined the company, there were teams of people throughout the offices working on the theoretical performance of these thin steel plates.
But it was the Melbourne investigation that would uncover the fatal weakness in the design. The first clue came when they looked at the joins between the boxes that made up the bridge. Far from the center of the collapse, they found something that didn't make any sense at all.
What we saw after the collapse was between box 2 and box 3, this transverse joint, which should have been flat here, like that, had buckled upwards like that, right across the bridge.
They seemed to be buckled in places quite remote from where the real action was.
That suggested that there was some sort of relative weakness in this construction here.
This is the hollow interior of the Melbourne box girder bridge as it is today. Steel plates run lengthways and crossways to keep the boxes flat. Without them, the bridge would buckle. And special care has been taken to reinforce these stiffening plates where they join up end to end. But when Professor Murray tested the sections of the collapsed bridge, he was surprised to discover that the Freeman Fox engineers had used only a single plate of steel to splice these crucial stiffeners together. That caused a dangerously weak joint.
Well, the splices were, shall I say, unusual. I mean, when you have two pieces of metal, they wish to join them at a joint. The usual thing is to have a plate on each side. But in some places on the bridge there was a plate on one side only, which contravenes normal engineering practice.
It was a flawed design. With only one thin plate of steel at each joint, there was very little to stop the box girders from buckling. How could such a costly error have been made? After all, engineers carefully calculate the stresses their designs must bear. The answer the Commission discovered came down to elementary mathematical mistakes on the part of the designers, Freeman Fox.
Freeman Fox had this enormous reputation, and there was no way they could go wrong. I mean, they couldn't make mistakes like that. I mean, the calculations showed elementary mistakes of arithmetic. 2 + 2 = 5, and that sort of thing.
The Melbourne Bridge was redesigned and rebuilt from scratch. At enormous cost around the world, these bridges were strengthened, and the engineering codes by which box girder bridges were built were completely rewritten. Freeman Fox's Avonmouth Bridge was built to the new codes.
The bottom flange plate was increased slightly in size, in thickness, and additional stiffening was provided in the webs of the girder there. That little stiffener there was an extra one that was added in to satisfy the requirements of the new code.
These apparently small changes have made a big difference to the strength of a flawed design. The pioneering box girder bridge, after a disastrous start, has now become one of the most successful bridge designs in the world. From great stadiums like the Kemper Arena to humble pumping stations like Abbeysted, this is how engineers have learned to make structures safe. Tragedy has always advanced design.
If you like this TLC show, now you can own it on video. Call the number on your screen and start an adventure for your mind. TLC offers its best shows on home video, including the episode you just watched, and each comes with a complete guarantee of satisfaction. Get your own high-quality VHS tape of this show for only $19.95, plus shipping and handling. TLC, Adventures for Your Mind. On home video. Call now to order.